and stayed up talking with me, so we just ended up playing tennis at 2 o'clock in the morning. He stayed with me, I did the performance, and that was my very last performance before we immigrated to the United States in 2001.
No matter how many times I hear it, Alanka's story is heartbreaking. I mean, I know it sort of has a happy ending, at least as happy of an ending as something like that can have. She has her brother Jaco to help her get through this, and thank God for that. Thank God for the work that they do today in getting to the bottom of what's really going on, so hopefully other children won't have to endure this. But something that came out a little later in my interview with Tom Horn really shook me, because this isn't just a small town problem. This isn't just a 1 in a million problem. It goes right to the top. I mean, it's the highest level of government corruption. One example most people would probably be familiar with is the Epstein case. But usually when people hear Jeffrey Epstein, they think of conspiracy theories, sensationalistic kind of stuff. But I found out there's actually a lot more to that story that can be substantiated than I originally knew. And I was shocked to find out. At this point, I knew it was time for me to talk to Tom Horn. He was the one that wrote Shadowland. He inspired the original Finders Project. He's the one that kind of got this whole ball rolling. So I knew when it came to Epstein, government connections, and actually cutting through the conspiracies and getting to the truth, I knew Tom Horn was the guy to talk to.
Epstein was a wealthy financier who molested and facilitated the molestation of numerous children. After his arrest, he was found unconscious in his jail cell with injuries to his neck. And after that incident, he was placed on suicide watch. Now, 6 days later, July 29, he was taken off suicide watch and placed in a special housing unit with another inmate. And the jail had informed the Justice Department that Epstein would have a cellmate and that a guard would look into the cell every 30 minutes. That's the way it was supposed to be. Those procedures, however, were not followed. And on August 10, 2019, he was found dead.
The Epstein saga and that whole universe was a closed and shut case in 2006. The level of evidence in 2006, I'd argue, was even more intense than it was when he finally fell in 2019. I would say this: Epstein was a master pedophile. What is not talked about is that Epstein was a master trafficker. But he was also what we call a John, a buyer. So here you've got an individual that was playing in all the sectors. What we really need to look at is this guy was a facilitator. He was providing children as a service to his friends. He went further than that. He provided modes of transportation, safe passage, political protection, financial protection. This guy was at the height of the crime, but what I don't want people to think is that it's only that 1%, the billionaire status, the Clinton effect, the Epstein effect, these elites. No, it's the janitor. It's the school principal, the police chief, the Fortune 500 CEO, the guy next door, because it's sex. It permeates society. The only difference between the janitor abusing children for sex and Jeffrey Epstein is the janitor could only afford it twice a month. Epstein abused children every 2 hours. But the Epstein network is a deep network. It's a network that's very protected. It's a network after his exposure and then his death in a prison in New York City. 40 names on the Epstein list was sealed in a backroom deal by a New York female judge under the guise of these John Does would suffer severe public scrutiny and harm to their business if their names were exposed. Well, frankly, I don't give a darn. You abused children, you were on the island. You are to go in front of a jury and tell us what you know and what you don't know. Were you engaging in it? Did you see and didn't say anything? But 40 of these names are sealed under a gag order, never to be exposed to the public. That's the level of corruption, and so it's at the district attorney level. It's at the judiciary level in the legal system. Mayor of New York City has a lot to answer for. It happened in his city, on his time, on his watch. And Epstein died on his time, on his watch. And all the conspiracy theories that come with that, or the facts of my belief that an industry sacrificed one of their own. It was time for someone to take the fall at the top level.
A death that has left many, many questions. Yesterday, he was found dead here, in his cell in Manhattan. The Federal Bureau of Prisons called it an apparent suicide. His death comes the day after documents were released by a Manhattan court. In those documents, Prince Andrew was accused of groping a young woman. The questions, and now conspiracies, will continue.
But it feels comfortable when we catch a bad guy and America can sleep at night and say, you know what, we caught our pedophile. We got him. We got the guy, Epstein, as if there was one. And it's comfortable, and the media would drive that narrative. The media would give us attention on Epstein, right? As if we found Billy the Kid. We found him, the one bank robber, right? But it's actually permeated society. We found the bad guy. No, there are thousands of these guys, It's organized and unorganized.
The circumstances surrounding his suicide quickly spawned different questions, doubt. In fact, President Trump tweeted one suggestion that it was Bill Clinton who was involved in his murder. Other people believe that too. But besides Trump weighing in on Epstein's suspicious death, Lynn Patton, for instance, the regional administrator at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, posted on Instagram that Epstein had been Hillaried. Other political Republican consultants, such as Fox News commentator Harlan Z. Hill, added that dead men tell no tales, he wrote. And then he said, just as Jeffrey Epstein had started to name names, suddenly, out of the blue, he decided to kill himself. And he added to that, okay, totally believable. People should know also that not all of the doubters of the official Epstein suicide narrative were conservatives. For instance, U.S. Representative Al Green said the suicide of Mr. Epstein is an impossibility. And he said, when an impossibility occurs involving powerful people and possible criminality, there must be an investigation to end speculation because the public has a right to know. And he said, I'm calling for a congressional investigation. So far, that hasn't really happened. Ultra-liberal Trump hater Joe Scarborough tweeted, he said, a guy who had information that could have destroyed rich and powerful men's lives ends up dead in his jail cell. How predictably Russian. Another Trump despiser, the former U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill, she let the world know what she thought, saying something stinks to high heaven. How does someone on suicide watch hang himself with no intervention? Impossible unless... I would say to the people watching this documentary that if they too find themselves not buying the Epstein killed himself in jail by hanging storyline, according to Rasmussen, they're soundly among 70% of Americans who also question the suicide conclusion. However, having said that, on Friday, August 16, 2019, the New York City Chief Medical Examiner's Office announced the official cause of Epstein's death was suicide by hanging.
New York City's chief medical examiner says an autopsy on Jeffrey Epstein shows the financier hanged himself in his jail cell. The findings released late today appear to shoot down theories that he may have been strangled.
And there was a statement that was immediately renounced by Epstein's attorney, who added that they fully intended to conduct their own independent and complete investigation into the circumstances and cause of Mr. Epstein's death, because, frankly, like most of the world, they weren't buying it. You might have noted that that inquiry has already resulted in the conclusion that Jeffrey Epstein's eyes had burst capillaries in them. And to medical experts, that suggested that the convicted pedophile was likely murdered through manual strangulation and that he did not hang himself. And that's what several forensic pathologists have said in different television interviews.
With hanging, when the loop comes up under the windpipe, under the mandible, there usually is not any kind of hemorrhages in the eye. With homicidal strangulation, because of the increased pressure, there are hemorrhages in the eye.
And when you examined the body, there were burst capillaries.
There were burst capillaries in the eyes called petechiae, and that's not conclusive, but that's greater evidence of homicide than suicide.
In addition to that, Fox News medical contributor Dr. Mark Siegel, he counts himself among numerous other qualified health experts who have raised all kinds of doubts about the suicide ruling, publicly maintaining that it's far more likely Epstein's death was murder. And that, for Siegel, was a conclusion he reached following, among other things, the autopsy that found broken bones in his neck, to which numerous other medical experts likewise cast doubt. They used that to cast doubt on the suicide narrative.
You observed the entire 4-hour autopsy of Jeffrey Epstein.
I did. There were multiple fractures of the Adam's apple, the thyroid cartilage, and the thyroid and the hyoid bone that are more indicative of a homicidal strangulation than a suicidal strangulation.
In October of 2019, the famous forensic pathologist Michael Baden, New York City's former chief medical examiner, he not only agreed with those conclusions, but he went on record saying that Jeffrey Epstein was indeed murdered, in his opinion, and he warned that other people with information Epstein had on them could also be at risk of joining the body count lists. And that was something that even New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio agreed with, saying that something here doesn't fit at all.
Sex cults exist in Hollywood. Sex parties exist, but not just sex parties and orgies for adults. We're talking about a particular flavor profile of children being abused in group sessions by elites.
At least 6 men accused director Bryan Singer of sexual misconduct spanning 2 decades, all of them underage at the time. After a year-long investigation and interviews with 50 sources, many describe regular Hollywood parties where teenage boys were allegedly given alcohol and drugs and encouraged to have sex with older men.
A lot of prostitution in our country is not prostitution. It's sex trafficking. Because if there's any force, fraud, or coercion, it's sex trafficking, it's not prostitution. And our numbers show us that under 2% of global prostitutes in the world are actually prostitutes. Because by definition, to be a prostitute, it would have to be 100% free will. If that person has ever been raped, ever been abused, ever been held over for fraud, force, or coercion, or to pay off debt, that's force and fraud, right? That is a sex traffic victim, not a prostitute. Potentially considering that something like sex cults or elites engaging in sex is just conspiracy theory would be hypocritical. Evil has no end. Not just children being abused in group sessions, children being sacrificed, organs being harvested, blood being used for ritual and ritual pacts, physical abuse, emotional, mental abuse of children. There's no question that this is going on in our nation, but in almost every nation. In Central Africa, it's custom. It's under the guise of witch doctory, witchcraft. They believe that harvesting certain parts of babies is great medicine.
Child sacrifice, said to be an ancient practice upheld by witch doctors, has re-emerged in Uganda. Many cases are not followed up by the police, and little is being done to protect potential victims. Around 900 Ugandan children have fallen victim to the practice.
A machete was sliced through Alan's head and neck in an attempt to behead him. He was also castrated. The work of witch doctors, attempting child sacrifice.
It's not like we're going to say, well, listen, Satan or demonic activity or evil also has boundaries. There's a threshold it just won't cross. Absolutely not. It'll sacrifice children. It'll move into cannibalism, the drinking of human blood, orgies, sex cults, orgies, without question. Once you've made an agreement spiritually to go to that place, when you feed darkness, darkness grows. Every single human being has dark and light in them. What we feed will grow. Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so you could just try to justify it any way you want, under your faith, your belief system, your occult, your satanic rituals, your secret society, right? It's happening.
In the book Shadowland, I thoroughly documented using high-resolution drone footage that we were able to get that flew over the top of Epstein's Orgy Island, took images of all of these bizarre structures, edifices that are on that island, including the temple. There's a giant sundial there with 13 chairs with the open hours pointed to what appears to a lot of people to almost look like rune stones. There are gods and goddesses all over the island. There's what appears to be a giant green man from antiquity on the island. There are labyrinths. The labyrinths we know refer to the Minotaur of ancient Greek mythology, to whom children were sacrificed. This all seems to be a grand scale example of the esoteric practices that were being carried out at Epstein's New Mexico Zorro Ranch and on his private island, involving mostly this mysterious large rectangle that is there, this big earthen barrier that's got 20-foot tall earthen walls and only one way in. It's really a berm fortification. But I found it interesting that while images of this enigmatic site on Epstein's Island were captured in 2013, bearing a very detailed design at the time inside the approximately 20-foot high walls with 4 walkways leading to an inner circle around a square. Then in 2017, as investigators were closing in on Epstein, there was what appears to be an effort made to disguise the uses of the area. They brought in dozers and pushed it all out, replaced this whole perplexing layout with a temporary tennis court that was then followed in 2019 by just an empty containment field where now they park equipment. Ancient occultic sites discovered around the world in olden civilizations use this same pattern. 4 walkways inside of a confined area leading to a circular midsection. Circular, square, rectangles, all combined in a specific kind of way. So this has a long history predating the time of Christ, literally by thousands of years. Ritual locations that employed those 3 main counterparts typically also included a temple, usually domed like the one on Epstein's Island, a second area where ceremonials, frequently elaborately, were performed, and then a third geometric pattern area, a circle, square, or a rectangle, where the main sacrificial altar was located on which human sacrifices were made. So imagine that on Epstein's Island and at his house, where all these elites were gathering, is the figure of a square within a circle. That symbolism was one to which rituals were and are performed. According to Manly P. Hall, the celebrated 33rd degree Freemason and mystic, this wisdom-reflecting architecture echoes the teachings of the human-sacrificing ancient Maya. It's a pattern that's reproduced in all of the major components of the Zorro Ranch and island berm area of Epstein's properties. 4 paths leading to a square encased in a circle.